Good stuff. Right, so I'm just sorting out a few technical issues while we start. That's fine. Because you can tell I haven't done it for 2 weeks. There was a few buttons I needed to press, but don't worry, it'll be all right on the podcast. The podcast version will be fine. Right. So okay. So what's? I mean, give us a little flavour of the show in terms of the content.
Well, the idea was to sort of examine what makes people smart, because I think in the last 18 months, I think a lot of us have realized that a lot of our friends and family are a lot dumber than we ever expected them to be. And even worse, it's that those people we found out to be dumb, 100% of them think they're geniuses.
Okay. Okay. And are you? Um, did you draw on sort of? I mean, obviously, there's plenty of fodder for that on social media as well. But did you draw sort of quite closely to your own circle for that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I grew up in Silicon Valley, so guys like Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, they were all in my backyard, essentially.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
Okay.
but also, like, I grew up around a lot of geniuses. I talk about the story of my father, who is a former gang member who went on to become one of the greatest cancer scientists alive, who also remained skeptical of global warming.
Wow. Okay. Right. So okay. So how do you? All right. So that's a really interesting jumping off point. We could talk about your show all night actually. How do you deal with someone who's obviously proved themselves in one particular field and then is obviously seems to be so counter to a body of opinion on another?
It's a great question, and you'll have to watch the show to find out. Yeah.
That is also a great answer.
Yeah.
All right, brilliant. Well, listen, Sid, that's what's going on at the moment with your life in real life, and obviously you've got this next leg, and we'll absolutely tweet out the dates on that. And for those people just joining us because of a slight technical hitch, luckily you didn't miss too much at the start. That's fine. It's been 2 weeks, so I hold my hands up in the air for not pressing the correct buttons. But to be fair, I've had to learn to speak all over again as well. It's amazing what I've done in 2 weeks. So, Sid, what about online? What about your life online in terms of how you use Twitter? You know, whether you enjoy it, who you like to follow, how you like to interact, that kind of thing.
So I very rarely use Twitter the way I normally did. I go the other way often, um, because I have a lot of like experience with human rights law and stuff like that. I primarily try to follow a bunch of them.
Yeah.
I find the hysteria over Twitter to be largely overblown, because I think most people follow a lot of assholes, and then they get a lot of awful stuff in their feed. But it's like, yeah, that's what happens when you follow a bunch of assholes.
That
If you
sounds.
follow
Yeah.
a bunch of funny people and a bunch of really really kind-hearted people, you tend to get some good stuff in your feed that is with both well
Oh.
information and stuff you can actually follow and believe in.
Okay, now that's interesting because what you've just said almost seems like an invitation to create your own. What do they call it? Not bubble. Echo chamber, essentially.
Of course.
Okay, but I mean, but then surely the people who are following those people who irritate them and drive them absolutely insane are making an effort to get out of their echo chamber.
Yeah, if you get frustrated with it, then you're getting what you deserve. Like the thing people always mistake, and I think the problem with your question there, if you don't mind me saying so,
That's fine.
is that I have no problem with an echo chamber on Twitter. The problem is when you have an echo chamber in the world.
But okay, but to some extent, Twitter is a reflection. How do you distinguish between the two? The only place that the place that you are going to suffer from being in an echo chamber is largely on social media.
The problem is that social media is not the world. Most people are
What?
not actively on social media. I know. So I find the entire premise to be mistaken, because in reality,
Okay.
if you're going around, like, in my life, I tour the fucking continent
Yeah.
and I meet a lot of different people. I'm very comfortable having disagreements with people over a glass of beer or whatever, but I'm not gonna subject myself to that when I'm not
You see, that's
outside. When I'm in home and I'm on Twitter, I'll follow the people that I like. I also don't look at it as an echo chamber because, let me give you an example, right?
okay.
For me, it's more about trusting the people who are on the ground within these fields, right?
Okay.
So, for example, during the Afghan withdrawal, what you often saw were people going, "Oh, why isn't Biden listening to the generals? Why isn't he listening to the generals?" I think that's a fair point. It's an interesting point. To me, when it comes to refugee law or homeless legal services and stuff like that, I want to follow the people on the ground. People call them activists, but to me, I just look at it as the lawyers who are dealing with the day-to-day cases of the people who are actually suffering the indignities.
Yeah.
And following them, I don't see it as an echo chamber as much as my chance to learn from experts.
Yeah, no, that is a useful distinction. I mean, obviously, yeah, because I mean, essentially, what I was talking about was more of a kind of an editorial kind of scrum and ding dong and the point scoring. And I understand what you're saying. You're talking about people on the ground, and also I think it's sort of interesting as well because your job to some extent, I know this is slightly different, but your job to some extent actually does put you in real life situations to actually, as you say, sit and have a beer with people and discuss these issues. And there are a lot of people, obviously keyboard warriors being one of them, is that they don't necessarily do that. It's not necessarily how they're engaging with these wider issues.
Absolutely. But I think it's one of those things too where I find the correct balance for a lot of these things is that we need people who are reasonable and we need people who are not reasonable.
Yeah.
Especially if you're trying to get something accomplished, you need people who are willing to compromise, and you need people who are willing to push those people to get a better compromise.
So, what's a good example of that? Is Afghanistan a reasonable example of that, do you think?
I would say Afghanistan is unfortunately a terrible example of that. Just because we never had a coherent choice in Afghanistan. Because we invaded under such foolish pretenses and then stayed under even worse pretenses, we were never able to have a clear decision tree of what we should or shouldn't do, where and where we shouldn't do it, and how to build coalitions to build there. However, if you look at things like the current negotiations that Biden is having and stuff like that, there are the people that are pushing for everything on his agenda to be included in the deal, and there are people who are pushing to have a deal. And both are needed because at the end of the day, a deal is necessary. However, it's only so useful based on what's included in it.
Yeah.
So you just need people to be able to push for both of those things.
But I mean, in terms of like taking you back a little bit when you said that the people who made the point that, why isn't Biden listening to the generals? I mean, you actually said that was a fair point. But I think given the narrative that you've just set out from your point of view, there was, it wouldn't have been a view that you would have listened to, for example, would it necessarily?
So the issue there is that I think, the generals are given a specific task in that situation where it's like, you need to help stabilize the country, ensure democracy flourishes.
Well,
We're going to spend a lot of money, but you will not get the benefit of a lot of that money, right? So we're basically tying these generals' hands behind their back and asking them to do an impossible task, which is why their opinions are valid, which is why when they say we need to delay the withdrawal, they are making a good point. And when Biden says more important than delaying the withdrawal is ensuring that it happens in the first place, because whatever chaos we create will still be a small blip compared to the larger chaos of staying over 20 years or 30 years more.
Yeah. No, fair enough.
Which is not even to say that was the correct decision. It's simply to say that seems to be his position.
I mean, this brings us. We can go. I think this point was a really good jumping off point to go straight into your selected tweets because
Sure.
Obviously you've picked one here. Let's just bring it up. Ooh, somewhat slow. Here we go. All right, Zoe Gardner, isn't it? Yeah. I've seen. So it's kind of like a sort of refugee and migration expert. I think it would be fair to say I've certainly seen her pop up in my timeline before. So if you just sort of read this tweet for us and for our podcast listeners, and then basically just kind of go forth from there, really, if you want.
Right. So this is taking a slightly different take on. This is about the UK involvement in Afghanistan. So Zoe's tweet is basically saying that I'll read it. The Afghan resettlement scheme so far amounted to nothing more than a rhetorical device. allowing anti-refugee voices to shout about the official route without bothering with the fact that it still literally does not exist. So, for example, the theoretical official route would be a refugee from Afghanistan coming from Kabul, right? Yeah. Landing in one of the ports of entry, such as an airport. The issue with that is, of course, that there are no flights from Kabul to the UK that make it easy for a refugee to get on it, if not impossible. Therefore, the thing that people are calling for doesn't exist.
Right.
Oh, sorry, go on.
No, you cut out very briefly, but it's fine. That's fine. It was very brief. So, yeah, okay. So where are we with, and I'm actually wondering whether to take as a double the other tweet as well, which is welcoming with dignity. In fact, should we take these two together, do you think? Or?
Well, they're quite different, but they're ultimately talking about similar things, right?
Let's do it.
Which is that often countries have an issue with refugees who want to settle in their country after approaching a third country first, right?
Yeah.
So, for example, if you're in Afghanistan and you get to the UK by taking a flight from Pakistan, the question is, why didn't you just resettle in Pakistan? Why isn't that country safe enough for you, right?
Yeah.
It ignores the realities on the ground. It ignores the fact that it's actually quite easy to enter Pakistan from Afghanistan and murder the people who are trying to not get murdered. It's very simple, right? I don't want to get murdered and I live in Kabul. I will go to Pakistan in order to actually go to a country that will keep me safe, which I believe to be the UK, and which under the UN Declaration of Human Rights and the Geneva Code should allow a Geneva Convention to allow us to do such things. Conservatives in multiple countries disagree, often over various weird reasons. One being pricing, which again ignores our responsibilities to these things.
So where are we in terms of the US and the UK in terms of refugees coming from Afghanistan? We know where? Because I mean, of course, that story's now gone from the media agenda and a lot out of the consciousness of most of us, except for those people, as you were saying earlier, who were on the ground and are following these things and tracking these things.
Well, it's a huge mess. I mean, a lot of people are using the sort of the statement, the official route, as an excuse to deny a lot of their asylum claims, despite saying we want to resettle anyone who helped us in the war and doesn't want to get murdered for helping us in war. And we're basically reneging on all over the world, not just the UK. The US is also not doing a great job with it. And that's really what this tweet speaks to, because for all the people shouting the official route, there is no official route. And when you shout official route and deny people's claims, you are murdering them. You are sentencing them to death. And there is no other way to look at that when you're on the ground.
I mean, clearly, obviously, what's British and US governments having to deal with the Taliban now in terms of processing, I assume there must be some Taliban involvement of this. Are we talking about the second country stage here as opposed to actually getting out of Afghanistan? I'm not sure what the situation is with this sort of cycle, if you like.
Some people are able to pay their way to escape from Afghanistan. They get to Pakistan, and then they try to come to the UK. Often the UK rejects their claim and flies them back to Afghanistan.
Right, okay. So when you say...
where they're then murdered.
So when you say that pay their way, so this is... How does that work? What's the sort of journey there?
Well, it depends. A lot of people take a lot of different routes, right? Basically, once you are going on the, let's say, unofficial routes, you're basically at the risk and whims of coyotes, which is a term for smugglers who will take you across borders, who prey on you, try to take all of your money, and in return, offer you your only chance of getting to a country worth living in your opinion.
Yeah, yeah. And then when you say that's the unofficial. Is there an official route at the moment? No, there isn't. No. Is there? No. Okay. I mean, this is just a sorry mess, really. I mean, obviously, and I obviously appreciate a lot of noise was made at the start of the crisis, the pullout, I should say. Well, both. That that refugees would be welcome and so on and so forth. And
it was very interesting how quick people were to condemn the administration for abandoning women who have now all abandoned those exact same women as they try to claim refugee status in our countries.
But so I mean,
Again, there's very, very funny stuff from a comedian I know. But...
well, no, but the thing is, see, this is the. I mean, I billed you tonight, obviously, as a comedian and podcast, and I very much had the law is my ass as in mind when I did that, and actually that would be quite a useful moment to sort of mention that. I don't know whether the podcast have anything to do with the case with Trump.
No.
Okay.
I did a podcast with my old law school professor Joe Kreitz, where we examined the legal news in the headlines and then interviewed these experts in all these different fields. It was really great. Just a podcast, just as an experience for me to meet all of these experts fighting the good fight who had to deal with.
So it's a real good ground. I mean, that podcast is a real good grounding for sort of activism and obviously just generally understanding these points in law. And it's absolutely worth a mention. Is the podcast still going?
No. It ended when I moved to Europe 3 years ago.
Okay. But it went for a good number of... it seemed to go on for... how long did it go on for?
I have no idea. It's a good question.
It seems,
you have 2 years?
I just remember writing it quite a lot on your biography.
Right.
But also, so tell us a bit about... And I'm glad that I haven't missed asking about this. But tell us about that. In the intro, we talked about how the show American Refugee was about the time that you helped beat Donald Trump in court to protect refugees who were victims of domestic violence. What was the story there?
Right. So the Center for Gender... So I took a class, a refugee law class, under a professor named Karen Masalo, who briefly worked for the Obama administration to help reform their refugee guidelines that they took in parts. And then I started basically volunteering for them.
Oh, you lost
stand-up shows in San Francisco and abroad to raise money for them. Okay. Because they had a client called Miss AB, who was a victim of domestic violence, who basically escaped from Central America, to America in order to gain asylum. An Obama-era judge denied her claim, and then under the appeals process basically lost. Long story short, he basically refused to listen to the appeals court until Trump became president, at which case they reopened the case. We lost on that next appeal, and her claim was denied for the next 6 years. Wow. Until Biden got into power, and we were able to allow her back into the country 3 months ago.
So the win came literally just 3 months ago then?
Yeah, the final win came 3 months ago, yeah.
Wow, okay.
Actually, and some of that, the cool thing is that the Supreme Court brief that they filed, some of that money that they used to file that brief was paid for by the people who came to my show in Europe, because we were able to donate a couple thousands of dollars.
Oh, fantastic. That's really good. And it's, I mean, obviously their life was on hold for quite a long period of time. I mean, that is the way it is, I suppose, with court cases. But how long was is it 6 years, or did it take even longer to...
It was basically 6 years. So if you go to the next tweet about the NPP.
Okay, well, hang on a sec. Whoa. There we go. Yeah.
So basically, the NPP refers to the Remain in Mexico program. And basically what that is it was a Trump-era policy that stated that while someone is waiting to hear on their claims of asylum, that they be basically sent to the Mexican border to await if they were approved or not. The problem being, of course, that the Mexican border is extremely dangerous, and these people were basically often held up at gunpoint by the cartels. Some of them were raped. There was murder. There was a lot of violence. And the Trump administration basically said it because they don't care, right? They basically paid Mexico a lot of money in order to do this. The Biden administration is basically, there's no kind way to say it. The Biden administration, it wants to keep doing that because it's cheaper to house them in Mexico than it is to house them in America while they await their verdicts.
Right. Okay.
And the Biden administration basically just said, well, we'll just make sure we do it humanely, despite the fact that there is no humane way in order to actually accomplish that goal. But they don't know one's going to check. So as long as you say the word humane, people who are skimming the article are going to be like, well, okay, that sounds better, and then not pay attention. So This tweet is about the border groups who basically walked out when the Biden administration tried to announce this. And sort of the goal behind this is the fact that Mexico has now stated that with Biden in power, they would only go back to this if these refugees had a much easier right and availability to counsel, basically if they had legal help while they were waiting their trials at the border. So the hope is that by these people walking out, Mexico will see that, in fact, these refugees will not have easy access to counsel. The Biden administration should not be believed when they say that there's a possibility to make this humane, and these people should have their claims heard in America, where they will be safer from cartels and et cetera, exploitation, et cetera.
Right, okay. And just for listeners, I'm just going to make it clear this is a tweet from an organisation called Welcome with Dignity. And the tweet runs, breaking, border groups walked out in protest of a meeting with the Biden administration officials just now regarding the administration's plan to resume the cruel MPP program. It's not possible to make the inhumane humane. And obviously you've had MPP sort of explain to you now. So what are you, in the loop with what the next steps would be for that campaign?
Right now it's to wait and see if the pressure affects the Biden administration. For as horrible as the Biden administration is, compared to Trump, the main difference is that less pressure is required in order to get them to change their ways. They just need to be called out on it.
Okay. Yeah.
However, they do still need to be called out on it with a decent amount of pressure. It's just that Trump wouldn't let losing court cases change his mind.
No, that's right. I mean, he absolutely was quite... what's the word? Well, hardline is definitely a word.
Right.
This is a good point, and we sort of talked about this in the sort of the beginning before we started streaming, which was that it's now, so we're October now, so we've had nearly a year since the election, and for a lot of people in the UK, there is a perception of, well, we had 4 years of this crazy sort of surreal dream of Trump. Now, Joe Biden has appeared. It all seems very quiet. He's president, not Trump, so that was good enough for a lot of people. What's your kind of report card for the last year for the Biden administration?
Well, I mean, the problem is that you can't really grade Biden without grading him on the curve that America has created, right? Mm-hmm. So there has never been a president who has been good when it comes to dealing with refugees. You know what I mean? I mean, America is famous for turning a boat full of Jewish refugees trying to flee the Holocaust, and we turned them away.
Yeah, gosh, I remember.
So, the idea that, Biden is a failure can be true, but within the context of all the presidents that came before him, he's no different than a lot of the Democrats, and still much better than most of the Republicans. So it's that unfortunate thing of understanding that Biden still represents progress, although he still also represents tragedy for most of these people trying to survive.
Yeah, so it's a kind of best worst option scenario. Yeah. I mean, that sounds like politics, though. I mean, even Jeff Norcott is one of my clients, and I mean, he's known as a conservative voting comedian. But his line is that the choice between the two main sort of party blocks is a choice between being waterboarded with sparkling or still water. I haven't obviously done that joke any in verbatim terms, but you see what he's getting at, and that's obviously, that can be very disappointing for activists, I would assume. I mean, do you think that a lot of people had? I don't think it was a kind of Tony Blair Obama moment where it was like the hopes of a nation on those two particular figures were so sort of sky high. I think people are just a bit more savvy now, aren't they?
Yeah, I think it was also just, Biden was very much a compromise candidate that, you could argue has still exceeded the expectations of what he has tried to get past. It's just
you froze.
One to understand and they take from this is the fact that... Is it?
So you froze momentarily, but you're back. You're back in the room. It's fine. It's very quick. It's a very quick freezing this week. That's good. So no, it's not my
end.
That sounds
good. But he's a compromise candidate, and I think you can argue that he's been more liberal than we had any right to expect him to be.
Okay.
But and I wish moderates would understand that he hasn't gotten that much more done than, say, a Bernie or Elizabeth Warren would have gotten. The idea that a very liberal candidate wouldn't be able to reach across the aisle, that argument doesn't hold a lot of water when the moderate cannot reach across the aisle either.
Right. Okay. Yeah. No. Fair enough. That's a good point, actually. And that certainly was the sales pitch for Biden above many of the other sort of candidates. Yeah. Now we've got another. I think what we'll do is we're going to bring this sort of into land with the more comedy story. So let's go. Let's keep on. Let's keep on forging through the political path with a very sort of meat and potatoes story in some respects, in the sense that it's about greed. It's like right. What is going on here with David Doel's tweet, which simply says, "How is this even legal?"
So, for example, when Biden is trying to get things passed in the Senate, he needs a 50-seat majority, which he has, to approve every vote. But as a result, that basically means if there is a senator with any particular whims, we often have to bow down to those whims because we cannot afford to lose a single vote. The senator who exploits this the most is a man named Joe Manchin. Joe Manchin right now is currently in the midst of killing one of Biden's climate change policies. Thank you, Martin, for who can't get an upgrade. And one of the things Joe Manchin always talks about is that he wants to do things in a measured manner. What he often never mentions is that although West Virginia is a big coal country state that would get hurt by this policy, specifically Manchin will be helped by denying this claim because he makes $500K a year from coal plants donating to him.
Yeah, I mean, so
his campaign.
We've got the screenshot here. The New York Times, breaking news: the heart of President Biden's climate agenda, a push to replace coal and gas-fired power plants, is said to be likely to be cut from the budget because Senator Joe Manchin opposes it. And then they've got the Vice News headline: Joe Manchin makes $500K a year, $500,000 a year from one of the dirtiest coal plants in West Virginia. Is Joe Manchin? Is he on the? Sorry, just to verify this. Is he on the Democrat side or?
Joe Manchin is the most conservative Democrat in the Senate.
Ah, right. Okay. So has he got quite an interesting voting record because of that? Has he voted?
He does.
Yeah.
We're basically in a very tough position with him because, by all accounts, he will be the last Democrat elected in West Virginia for the next 50 years.
Right. Okay.
So he's an incredibly conservative Democrat. However, everyone who will replace him will be 1,000 times more.
Oh no.
So there's really nothing to do.
Okay. I mean,
because we need his vote.
Yeah, I mean, is it essentially? But are you saying that is it going to go Republican next time then?
Yes, the moment he retires, West Virginia will go Republican for the rest of
he
time.
Is...
It's no different than Ohio, which is in the same boat. Sherrod Brown, who is a very liberal senator, also for whatever reason seems to be the only Democrat capable of winning in Ohio. And once he's gone, Ohio will become a red state.
But has Manchin basically tailored his politics because of his electorate, or was he already? Well, by the sounds of it, he was already kind of pretty kind of conservative anyway.
Yeah, he's known as a moderate because America's pretty far to the right overall, but he's always seen it as like, well, I would rather get nothing done than things done through the wrong sorts of processes or whatever. So, it's unfortunate, but the only way to sort of get rid of his power is to elect senators in other states, because in West Virginia we're fucked.
Isn't it? I mean, there was a couple of weeks ago. There was a climate change article in the Daily Mail, and it was a climate change skeptic article. It was written by a Tory peer, and the Tory peer was sort of owned some kind of a deep coal mine in somewhere in Nottinghamshire or something like that. I can't remember off the top of my head, but that was more of a kind of like, it's one of those stories where you sort of think, oh well, I'm kind of really not surprised. And I suppose for some British observers to see this story about a Democrat might be a surprise, but I can see how he's of his kind of area and that's a tricky one. But it's a I can see how agonising it is as well, because it's not as if you can get that situation that you mentioned, was it Idaho, where you can actually have someone quite liberal who manages, presumably through the force of their own personality and charisma, to somehow be elected by what is essentially a very conservative electorate.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. That's sort of it's an interesting one. I mean, how is this even legal? What who are who's going to adjudicate on that? I mean, is he going to meet some kind of judgment on this, or are we?
Yeah, he'll be fine. I mean, I'm pretty sure Nancy Pelosi takes a lot of money as well, so it is what it is. So that was actually the impetus for my show. Funny enough, technically, we are not allowed to accept foreign donations. That's generally still illegal when it comes to the United States. However, when it comes to things like climate change, when it comes to things like refugees, the foreign people should have some say, because what happens in our world affects the people of the world. So the idea for the show was, it's illegal for you guys to donate to these organizations and campaigns. However, it's actually very legal for an American comedian to donate to these things, and he can make his money however he wants to make his money. So if you really want to hack the U.S. elections and you want to hack the Supreme Court and pay for legal briefs that help refugees, go watch a comedy show done by me, and good news, your tickets will actually go towards doing these things.
Some people might see that as slightly cynical. You'd certainly get some flack caught off any right wing sort of. I mean, they obviously want to make sort of mincemeat of that, wouldn't they? Really, if you're essentially using it as a marketing ploy. I know you better, Sid, so I'm not suggesting that. I'm just saying that some people will use anything as grist to their mill, I think.
Let me put it this way: who gives a shit? You call it whatever the fuck you want to call it, but as long as we can get some money to these organizations, they can keep fighting. Because you have to remember, when you're in a refugee organization, you're still going up against the U.S. government, which has unlimited money to throw at making sure these refugees don't get asylum. Yeah. Call me an asshole. You know what I mean? That's why I'll never be fully affiliated with these organizations, so that they can always have the plausible deniability, and I can keep pouring money into them.
Yeah, but I think it's a good way of raising money, and I've seen that you're going to be doing that on the second leg of the tour as well. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. Brilliant stuff. Right, now, as you mentioned, Martin had a little comment there. Can't get enough greed. Belated hello to you, Martin. An absolutely dedicated star viewer and listener. Great that you're here tonight. So we've pushed through some difficult but engrossing sort of subjects here, which is that's the name of the game. That's Twitter. That's the way she rolls. Absolutely. But we've got your tweet here from Josh Gondelman. This is going to open up a fairly large, open-ended discussion, really, on comedy, I think. And there's a good number of things that have happened recently that we can sort of pick up on. So if you can just read Josh's tweet out, and then we'll get into it.
Yeah, sure. Josh Gondelman, who's a very, very funny comedian. I think he's now an executive producer for Jesus and Marrow, but he used to write for John Oliver's show for a long time. And his tweet basically says, one weird thing about the "you can't say anything anymore" take is that there's a massive amount of excellent stand-up comedy being performed, recorded, and released all the time these days. And it's a very good tweet by a very smart man.
Yeah, and he does make a fair point, because there is an awful lot of content of which a lot of it is very good. But this opens it out quite nicely, because we're post Chapelle again, aren't we? Here we are again. It's like Martin knows his comedy. Josh is great. I'm absolutely going to have to look him up. And if I haven't already, no, you look silly me. I hadn't even followed him. Have now. I've rectified that wrong. It's so. So the first thing that it kind of made me think of a little bit with Chapelle, because there's been, again, a huge sort of fuss over. I haven't watched it, but God, I've read about it to the point where I just feel I feel like I have, or I don't want to. I don't know. Well, obviously I'm going to watch it at some point to make my own mind up. But I mean, the whole sort of Chapelle stick at the moment is that you can't say anything, but here I am saying it, and I'm going to cop the flack on it, and it's kind of been like self-perpetuating sort of cycle of that. And because I haven't seen it, I'm not going to absolutely judge, but I can't help noticing that everyone is obviously talking about it. I mean, have you seen the show in question?
Yeah, I actually really liked it,
There we
which
go.
I know is like a tough thing to admit as a progressive person. But like, one of the things I wish people would understand about stand-up is you don't have to agree. I don't watch stand-up to agree with people. I watch stand-up to hear their takes and laugh. But the idea of ever having to agree with someone like Chappelle or Burr or whoever even like a Hannah Gadsby, I think is such a weird requirement for stand-up comedy. I've never had it. I have a lot of friends who are conservative comics. It's funny. We were talking about this, but just in the last topic. But for all the people who will claim that I have a cynical reason for raising money for these organizations, they never seem to apply that to the comics who are like, you can't say anything anymore. I guess I'm the last bastion of free speech. Pay for the tickets. I'll take all the money. I can listen. I can be cynical with the best of them.
That's interesting. Look, so I'm basically saying that you're appreciating the craft and you're enjoying the show, whether or not you can agree with that person, and that is really important. So it sort of makes me think of two things. First thing is that the audience have always wanted to buy into a comedian. They've always wanted to be, if possible, it's not always the case. They like the idea of being the comedian's friend, or they be with the comedian in a bar and all the rest of it. That doesn't work with everyone. It doesn't work with. It doesn't particularly work with Jerry Sadowitz. It doesn't work with Scott Capurro necessarily, for example, or because I think the dynamic there is that they enjoy the distance from each other
Right.
to some extent. But there is a kind of the way that it's counterintuitive in some ways is that some people need to feel like they are buying into the charisma of that comedian, and if they're saying something that skews that slightly, it can kind of interrupt the flow of that relationship. And I understand from a purely academic point of view, or from a comedian's perspective, rather than perhaps an audience perspective, that you can. It's a bit like what an old film teacher told me. He said, look, if you're not enjoying the film, it doesn't matter, because you're looking at the cuts, you're looking at what the director is doing, and you can still enjoy the technical side of that, whether you are enjoying the content. And I think that's kind of a useful lesson, because it can obviously applies to all art forms, and it kind of carries through. But don't you, if you watch something from like one of your sort of conservative comedian friends that is jarring, I mean, say they say something about immigration that you find jarring, does that not detach you from their content and their narrative, or is it just
No. So let me give you an example, right? I do talk about race a lot in my act because I'm a brown man. It's just observational comedy to me. But I have white friends who will often say, "Oh, if I said that as a white man, I mean, people wouldn't even let me say that." I'm like, "Yeah, you know why? Context. That's why." But some of them will go on stage and make that point, and they'll make it in a way that's funny enough that I'll laugh because, they did a good job with it. I can still disagree with their point, even if their point actively would praise the idea of ignoring the context with which my disparity in society exists. They did a good job. It's funny, so good for them. What do I care?
That's okay. I mean, that's great. I mean, I think that's good to hear that, because obviously again, obviously we're on a show about social media, and that context and that nuance is something that is often completely lost on social media, and certainly in terms of conducting an argument through social media. I mean, there's a comedian I know who, and I can't remember whether they told me they've actually said this publicly or not, so I'm going to kind of paraphrase, but I do know a comedian who was involved with a course teaching other comedians, and one of the people on the course basically turned around to them and said, look, I kind of make it my business to go to open spot nights, and when I hear anything that I don't think is on message, shall we say, I call them out on it, which just seems like such a strange way to approach it, because you're not going to get that right all the time for a start, and obviously it's completely subjective in terms of how you're applying that. But
I agree.
that
100%.
kind of story is sort of fairly sort of chilling, and I hear a lot of that. I mean, what do you witness that on the circuit in terms of, do you feel that heckles are different? Do you feel that responses are different now to how they were, in terms of how people are shocked, why they're shocked?
Yeah, I mean, you have people who are now more empowered than ever to give their opinions. Like a lot of the issues in stand up, if you can give it a real opinion based, comes from the fact that I'm trying to think of the best way to put it. Basically, comes from a lot of voices that have never been given the right to speak up, suddenly speaking up, and then we have to now deal with the fact that this opinion we probably are uncomfortable with now exists in our space because the person who made it is finally empowered enough to say it. But generally speaking, I mean, one of the things people have to remember is heckling isn't common. You don't get heckled in every gig. If you get heckled in every gig, you're a terrible comedian.
You're consistent, but you're terrible. Yeah.
You're terrible. That's why there's like, there was a trend like 5 or 6 years ago of like, comedian destroys heckler. And, some of those comedians would post like 50, 60 videos. And I'm like, who gets heckled 50, 60 times over a 2-3 year span? You're a terrible comedian. There's a reason you haven't posted a single clip of your material, but we have 80 clips of you calling a woman a cunt. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, I mean, okay, that's true. They've obviously got form in some respects, but I think it's not. Yeah, I guess so. I think it's that that some of the feedback I've heard is that it's not so much heckling now as people just saying you can't. They are saying in some cases you can't say that.
Right. So there's two versions of that, right? The first, which is the most annoying to comics, are the ones who basically get quote unquote triggered from a phrase, right? So I know Nico Yearwood has a joke that is pro gay rights, but it approaches it from a silly angle, which makes it sound like it's about to be homophobic, even though the punchline clearly is pro gay rights. Kurt Metzger famously has this about pretty much basically the same topic ultimately.
Yeah.
And you'll get people criticizing it because they haven't listened. And one of the things that I think Nico did in a clip he posted recently, and a lot of comics should do, is point out to the audience that this person didn't listen to you.
Yeah, I saw that clip. Yeah.
Sometimes I think the biggest mistake a comic can make is to talk directly to the heckler after they heckle you, when in a lot of cases you're better off talking to the rest of the audience, which actually did understand you, isn't on the heckler side, and just reminding them that they're not on the heckler side is a great way to do that.
But now, isn't Nico's now? I mean, people listening and watching this should sort of check out that clip. I can't remember how viral it went. Now, for me, there was he didn't want to burn his material, which is why the context wasn't there. But the clip, the ending was there when he deals with the audience member. But that was an example of him going direct to the heckler, which the audience seemed to really rather enjoy.
No, see, I think he wasn't actually going directly to the he was speaking at the audience member, but he was speaking it for everyone else to hear.
Yeah. Okay. So it was more of a kind of he's more of dressing the room, even though he was okay, in the sort of theatrical sense. Yeah, totally. That's great.
At least that's how I perceived it.
Yeah, no, it was an interesting clip, and it actually makes you want to go and see the show. And I don't know if that shows that joke is in his special, but I still haven't caught up with that on YouTube. But I'm looking forward to doing that. When you selected this tweet, I literally the night before, Chortle had tweeted. One of the writers of Airplane had written in commentary about offence. Have you read this piece yet, Sid? I don't know.
Yeah, I haven't read the Chortle version of it. I basically read his quote.
It's the same thing, I think. Yeah.
And I understand the point he is trying to make.
So let's just
But I think
recap for listeners,
Sure,
essentially,
sure.
that what he was essentially, and said you can fill in as well, but he was looking at sort of a knockabout comedy in Airplane and making a case for that still standing up today because of the element of surprise and because of the jokes essentially being sort of a victimless crime. I mean, Airplane's been repeated a lot recently, and there are sort of sequences where they are just so bonkers and over the top that it does kind of, it goes past, it tries to go past offence essentially, but you've got the two characters who are talking in jive, and then the white lady who's translating for them. That was one of the examples that he mentions in the piece. I mean, he didn't mention the sort of skit where they're queuing up to sort of shut that woman up, which is all slapstick violence. But I mean, I couldn't see anyone doing that today. And the piece is essentially about Airplane. He doesn't quite say Airplane wouldn't get made today, but that's essentially, I suppose, what it is saying, isn't it?
Right, that is what he's saying. And it goes back to two things. One, it goes back to the fact that social media is not real life. So people complaining on Twitter does not mean the majority of people wouldn't probably still like Airplane today. Airplane is a very silly movie. At the same time, some of this is because people who were previously voiceless, who when Airplane came out probably were not comfortable with these scenes, the new generation versions of them are empowered to speak out about shit like this.
Yeah.
So when they see a scene where 30 people line up to hit a woman, they don't view it from the context of a middle-class, safe, suburban way of going, oh, this is clearly absurd. They go, people are hitting women a lot in real life, and so I would like to bring up that it's weird that we're using this as comedy right now when it's just a real shit that, like, it's not absurd if it's happening in real life, basically. Yeah. Those people are now empowered to speak up. They can be annoying as hell. I'm a comedian. I like the silly stuff. They can be annoying as hell. It doesn't mean they're wrong. You know?
That's a really sanguine take on it, Sid, and I think that's really important. I mean, actually, David Zucker has a phrase in this piece. He calls them the 9%ers, because I think, is it 9% of people who are on social media in the US? And I mean, I've had figures like, I keep looking at the Twitter percentages, and I'm never quite sure where it's resting. But yeah, I mean, they are in that arena. Those voices obviously now sort of augmented, and there is often a kernel of there's always a sort of kernel of truth in terms of the statistics, for example. So you can look at domestic abuse statistics. You can't deny that it's happening, and you can't deny that the basics of sort of violence are inherent in that joke. I mean, people even talk about Punch and Judy shows in that sort of context. But it's interesting because even though it's maybe sort of disparate voices or lone voices or voices that are now newly empowered because of the social media platforms, they seem to have a very an inordinate amount of power. They're reflecting an incredible amount of power.
But that's because we choose to believe that they represent the world. They don't. They represent a part of the world. You know, one of the things I wish also was given more weight in these discussions is the context that comedy requires. You know, we often talk about the context that should be given to the people who are watching this, disagreeing with whether they be from the right wing or the left wing. But we never talk about the evolution of comedy itself and the right to look at this art form as an ever-evolving piece where it's okay to cringe at things made 40 years ago. It was made 40 years ago. We now have 40 years more of context and information to inform our watching of those scenes, which were never intended to have that much more information, you know, being put in it.
Yeah. And you know, people weren't forced to put emphasis on certain policy areas or you know, issues because, well, I mean, they ran with the agenda of whatever the agenda was at the time, and that agenda is obviously splintered now by social media. It's like we're having to go around putting out fires. Some of these things I totally understand that they were absolutely points that needed to be made, because I mean, essentially when I was growing up, you were a passive viewer. I mean, yeah, you could write to the TV Times or the Radio Times or, you know, Mary Whitehouse or Barry Took or something like that. That would be about only people over 45 can hear me now. But you know, it's essentially you would not you generally make the effort to do that. And there were things that we were asked to sort of take on trust, which was certainly iffy. I'm glad we managed to dovetail those tweets, and I'm very pleased that you'd read that piece as well. I think I'd only seen it pop up last night. We're coming into land in terms of the end of the show now, so I've selected any other tweets that we haven't discussed at all here. Let's just quickly, I love this one, very British reference, but from Michael Holden, a screenwriter and journalist. There would be no culture war if there was still Top of the Pops. You learn to sit through what you didn't like, which I think is beautiful because we've all got memories in the States. I don't know what the US equivalent would be if there was one of Top of the Pops, but it's essentially the kind of hit parade, the chart show, and you'd want to watch your favourite bands on it, but there would always be songs you didn't like, and that's a lovely point about being able to sit through something that you didn't like. Although in fairness, if you scroll through Twitter, there's so much not to like.
Right. Well, the inverse is actually also true too. One of the problems with the way we perceive art is we often criticize it in 2021 for not being to our standards, for it to not be universal. And why should that be the standard when all we've learned over the last 20 years is that art is becoming more niche? There's more of our groups, there's more of our culture, there's more of our echo chambers, if you want to use that term. So why are we requiring art to go beyond it when some art will and some art won't?
Yeah, no, fair dues. That we could talk about all that all night. It's been a fantastic hour, Sid. It's been challenging and informative, and very to the point. I have to say, it's been brilliant. As I say, there's a whole stream of tweets there. We had a little chat about Donald Trump actually facing his golden shower moment as well. So check out all those tweets. Now, Sid, tell everyone what you are up to next. Where can we see you next?
Well, I'm running a brand new stand-up night called Code Word Comedy every other Monday at a new venue called the Covent Garden Studios, which you can find in Covent Garden. And every other week, other than that, you can find me at a show called Double Booked, which is also the Covent Garden Studios. So basically, I'll be at the Covent Garden Studios every Monday.
Covent Garden Studios now. Okay, fantastic. Oh, we know where to find you.
I also recommend you guys follow me on Instagram at Looking for Sid, since that's where I tend to post more tour dates than I ever do on Twitter. Because to be honest, I really don't use Twitter that much anymore, other than to read tweets from people I consider experts.
It's fine. We're now open. I had, when I first started this, I was thinking, let's get the people in with the big Twitter followings, and it's like, and then I was like, no. I don't want that. I want the people because I started this on a curve of really quite loving Twitter, and now I've come back down to earth. But this is therapy now. So brilliant. So that's where we can see you. So I totally don't have any excuse but to not come and see you now because I know exactly where you're going to be. But you're off to Barcelona soon, aren't you?
Yes. On Thursday I go to Barcelona for the first attempt at doing my new show, Illegally Funny.
Okay. So how are you getting there? Oh, Martin, you're such a wag because you're going to Barcelona. So you're there in Barcelona kicking off the tour, but have you got loads of European tour dates? You're going to be in Hungary 4 times after that kind of thing.
So yeah, I'll post those tour dates as they become official. Nothing is official yet, but I think you'll be seeing a lot more of me in UK festivals and internationally all over the EU. And you can follow me at Looking for Sid on Instagram or at Mr. Sid Singh on Twitter for those tour dates as they become official.
Fantastic stuff. Right, well, Sid, just hang back for a while and we'll have a quick chat in the green room after we stop streaming. Just thanks so much for everyone who's joined us tonight across our various streams, which I appreciate started approximately 3 or 4 minutes late because I didn't press a button. But I'm back in the swing of it now. It won't happen again. Speaking of which, next week, which is Sunday, the 24th of October, we will be joined by Pierre Novelli. And I very much hope that my co-host, Sajila Kershi, will be joining us after a long break away. And I think she's really looking forward to that. So that's going to be Good. There's going to be more boxes on the screen, as it were. So I have to dig around with the formatting. But yeah, please do follow us at LKT Zoom. Look out for the next show. Look out for the clips of this show, which will be tweeted ASAP, and we'll get a link for the YouTube version of this show sort of punted out on Twitter just as soon as I've formatted everything. And I think that at the moment, that's everything there is to say, except thanks so much for joining us once again after our 2-week hiatus. Goodbye. See you soon.